On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World, Season 2. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier episode today, two menus, poetry and fiction, Rachel DeWoskin in conversation with Ranjit Hoskote, which was a fabulous, extraordinary session. You can catch it on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, or on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. Our next session of the day is Muscular India, Masculinity, Mobility, and the New Middle Class. Michiel Baas in conversation with Vivek Tejuja. Unraveling a world hidden in plain sight, Michiel Baas's Muscular India, Masculinity, Mobility, and the New Middle Class introduces us to the inner workings of the gyms of a new India. An opportunity of upward mobility for the trainers and specialists, these places also provide a break from the traditional masculinity represented by the pehelwans or wrestlers of the akhadas, which are the wrestling schools in India. In a conversation with author Vivek Tejuja, Baas discusses the intricacies of the use of bodily capital to escape class barriers and the contradictions within a space that has taken India by storm. Michiel Baas's work mostly centers on the Indian middle class. He has published extensively on the topic of fitness and bodybuilding in India, Indian student migration to Australia, the migration trajectories of skilled professionals in Singapore, the Indian migration industry, and the life and lifestyles of IT professionals in Bangalore. He's also a partner of JLF in Amsterdam, or in this case, to be JLF in Amsterdam.
Absolutely.
Vivek
Hope
Tejuja
so.
loves food and cats and wants nothing more than to swim in a sea of books. An accidental writer, he cherishes solitude, except when we drag him out kicking and streaming onto a JLF platform, and wishes that there was more time to read and write. He's the culture editor at Verve magazine. Remember, all our sessions that have been broadcast are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And please do remember to question and comment by typing it into the comment section below. And Vivek will ask these of Michiel at the end of the session. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our Facebook and YouTube channel. And finally, if you've enjoyed JLF and the Jaipur Literature Festival and all that we've done, and if you feel the literature inspires and empowers as it does, do help us at Teamwork Arts continue to bring you JLF's Brave New World. Do please subscribe and buy a super chat and super sticker now on YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, Muscular India, Masculinity, Mobility, and the New Middle Class, Michiel Baas in conversation with Vivek Tejuja. Michiel, Vivek, over to you guys.
Thanks, Sanjoy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sanjoy. Yeah.
Hi, Michiel. Good evening.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. So, Michiel, you know what? Muscular India. When I was reading this book, for me, the most interesting part was how men who travel to, say, metropolitan cities from smaller towns and villages, and their aspiration is very different in that sense. Like, they don't come with the idea of becoming fitness trainers or getting involved with something to do with fitness. In fact, you've spoken about people who work in the IT sector, who work in the manufacturing sector, who have other jobs, and then they sort of discover, fitness as a trajectory to rise up the social ladder in that sense. So would you like to talk to us more about this complexity, or in that sense, how does this work in that direction that they come to do something else and they end up, doing something totally different, which they're not thought of?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about fitness trainers is really that they're doing something different, and I discussed that at length in the book. They really deviate from the norm in many ways. They come from low middle class families where they've usually been taught to think about their futures in a very highly specific way. They follow in their father's footsteps. They do something that is common within their community. And then they decide to become fitness trainers. And that trajectory itself is always characterized by the idea of doing something very different. And with that comes actually very little support initially from other family members, because nobody has any experience with what it means to be a fitness trainer. So what you see is that families actually often struggle to comprehend what it might be that their sons are going to do for a living. Then you talked a little about the trajectories, and one thing you see about the men that I highlight in the book is that their backgrounds vary quite a bit. I think nobody sort of wakes up one day in his teenage years and thinks like, I'm going to become a fitness trainer. It's something that develops over time. And for that, you really need to look at what happens with their own bodies and their own passion, they develop for fitness and bodybuilding.
Because so as a gay man, for me, the idea of fitness is typically, at least for me, not being a gay man, but just by the virtue of it being so personal, I'm very lazy. Just the idea of going to a gym or even trying to work.
I was supposed to go this morning. I was supposed to go this morning. So
I'm in awe of the people who do it. So a regimented routine of that sort. And I'm also very ashamed and scared to go to a gym because I feel that, my body will be judged out there.
Yeah.
And you've also spoken about body shaming in the book. And not from, of course, the trainer's perspective or the fitness trainers or the people, but in terms of the clientele also. You have written in bits and pieces about that.
So I think Vivek, I so recognize this, because like I said, this morning I was literally supposed to go to the gym, and then I often find an excuse, which in essence comes down to being lazy. Motivating you to go to the gym is quite a big deal. And this is something that I really admire about the man that I write about in this book. It is not just motivating yourself on a weekly or a monthly basis, but often for years on end, you're working towards a particular goal, and probably also with the knowledge that it's never quite finished, that work on that body is never quite done. The six-pack is never as perfect as it needs to be. The bicep is never as pronounced as it should be. So it's always a work in progress. And the moment you and I see it as a body to be admired, a bodybuilder or a fitness trainer might just think of it, I'm only halfway. But then that trajectory has been ongoing for a number of years already. But to come to the idea of fat shaming, there's a very interesting dynamic there of body shaming as such. I think bodies are always shamed, bodies are always judged. So you don't need to go to the gym for that or to avoid going to the gym for that. We always see other people's bodies. It's literally the first thing we see about any other person that we encounter on the streets. The interesting thing with fitness trainers and bodybuilders is that from our perspective, we admire them for the work they've put in and for, kind of sort of the perfection they emulate, that they approach, which is so idealized in popular culture. But at the same time, they themselves might not think of it that way. They might advertise themselves on Instagram and Facebook as having a body that others admire. But when I interviewed them, they were always full of doubt about that body as well. And they struggled with issues of body dysmorphia, for instance, no longer being able to properly assess what the body is, what the body they have. So they no longer see themselves in the mirror the way you and I would see them. So there's a lot of depression there as well. And I think that comes with that overt focus on the body as well. If you always look at yourself in the mirror, if every day consists of evaluating the way you look in the mirror, then you're bound to develop some kind of complex because of it as well.
In the chapter Sex and Desire, you speak in detail about how the body is used in that sense to make money for solicitation, and how then one views themselves when you talk about Kishore or when you talk about Shivam or even Raj for that matter.
Yeah.
And I just want to understand that when it comes to building a body, which is of course the your exterior, that like you said, the first thing we notice is the body. So
Mhm.
in that chapter, it's almost like it ends and begins with the body. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
gets really a chance to get to know these people, because
Mm.
it's like it's for a one-time activity, and for sexual gratification, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So where does, so when you're interviewing these men, how, what were they okay with the idea? How did, I mean, of course you've spoken in the book, but I'm asking for people who are going to watch this.
Yeah.
How do they feel at the core of it as people?
Oh, you mean how they felt about being interviewed by me, or that whole trajectory of
The whole
being?
trajectory of being of
Yeah.
yeah.
So they are objectified, of course, in a certain way. I mean, but they play with that quite a bit themselves. If you look at Instagram updates or those on Facebook, you see that men often use hashtags to layer their hot bodies or being sexy beasts or whatever tag they use to describe that body with. So they contribute that to that themselves. The chapter you just mentioned is really about the question of how that actually works, because there's so many stories about these men as well as being erotically interesting, sexually available. How does that actually work? And this was a question I was asked countless times over the years, and not just by my gay friends, but also by lots of straight friends who would all heard stories of these men also doubling as escort workers, or being gay for pay or otherwise. And that fascinated me immensely, because some of these men I've known for about a decade. I'm in that sense a very much a slow anthropologist. I try to spend a lot of time with my informants before I start writing about that, and they would never tell me anything about this. And it wasn't because they were keeping it a secret from me, because I knew pretty much everything else: financial worries, depression issues. And it was also hard for me to imagine that this was going on at the scale that a lot of my friends assumed it was. So that's the kind of sort of question I'm seeking to tackle in chapter 6. What is the truth about that availability? And in the chapter, I zoom on 3 different informants. 2 who are successful fitness trainers, one who is a bodybuilder, competing bodybuilder, the other one who has a successful business, and a third who now actually does provide escort work. And I try to understand their trajectories and how they've ended up saying yes or
Okay,
no
let's
to.
just lost Michael. Michael, did you want to repeat that? We just lost you for a second.
Oh, you lost me. Okay. So what I was saying, that in chapter 6, there are basically 3 characters, and each of these characters, I basically ask what is, I'm seeking to understand what is true about the assumption that my friends have that these men are available for sexual services. And it turns out that a lot of my informants were indeed not available at all for that, but they'd all encountered that trying to be models and under the casting couch. Such questions would have emerged, or they would have been approached online. But there is actually one person in the book who does make the decision at some point to make his money out of providing same-sex escort work. And that's the final person that I talk about in the book.
For me, the whole idea of upward mobility, by, like you said, by using body as your capital, was very, very fascinating. Because to my mind, one can only go this up, or this eye, by using it. And then you look at the different facets in the book of how they think, how, say, for instance, for them, being well versed in spoken English is so important, or to perhaps roam about in a society or culture of people where they are able to speak about books, or say, English sitcoms. So this cultural divide, which is so large in the country, how then does body become sort of like a tool or a capital to be able to bridge that gap? From their point of view, what role does it play?
Yeah, this is one of the central puzzles in the book, I guess, to understand how these men are able to climb the social ladder. Like I describe at length, is that they hail from lower middle class families, for whom being middle class or calling themselves middle class is actually a fairly new phenomenon. And as such, they're typically new middle class, but they're also very much vernacular middle class. None of these men grew up speaking English at home the way upper middle classes have always done. So a big difference between these kind of categories, middle class categories, is not so much capital but knowledge, social capital and cultural capital being the most important ones. So where upper middle class families, you see, kind of attend English medium education, or and grow up in an environment where they're very confident and with being middle class. This is not the same for these men, but what they do have to offer in return is bodily capital, because what personal training clients are after is a body like that for themselves. So they're seeking the services of a trainer. And then within the gym, that momentum of an hour where the trainer and the client meet and interact is also an opportunity for the trainer to learn from the client and to kind of sort of work out what it takes to become or be middle class. So bodily capital in that sense is what he has to offer. It's what opens the door to upward mobility.
Now to segue into this, since you're speaking about bodily capital and the way they perceive themselves and their worth in relation to that, the idea of steroids, which you also speak about greatly, there's a chapter dedicated to that in the book, and which is very ironic, right? Because you have mentioned that the trainers and the bodybuilders perhaps consume steroids because they have to show an image of themselves, and yet they discourage their clients from doing so. So it's like this sort of irony of sorts, or this dichotomous behavior that steps in. So, I mean, then what is the meaning of building your body? And this is without any judgment. It's more for understanding. How then they perceive in terms of not ethics, but more so in terms of finding a faster way to do that.
Yeah. See, the question of steroids and growth hormones and everything that comes with it is actually quite complex. I mean, not every trainer is keen on taking that. Most of them are well aware of the health risks. But obviously, if you want to shine on stage in a bodybuilding competition, there is almost no avoiding it. Certainly not when it comes to the serious bodybuilding competitions. And that is a worldwide thing. That's not just an India thing. Of course, what makes the matter probably a little bit more complex in India is that for a lot of these men, the moment they get into this, they have to rely on the knowledge of others, their gurus and their own trainers, for knowing what they're injecting their body with or what they're taking. Some actually do also provide their clients with steroids or growth hormones, but far more common is it to see them function as a middleman for protein powders, supplements, etc. But it does happen, yeah.
Now since the pandemic has hit us, I would assume that people who are trainers and consultants and sort of life coaches in that sense would have been hit hard by this, right? So if you've spoken with them around this time, what do they have to say about, say, working from home in that sense, providing Zoom sessions on their clients, or, Instagram workout sessions, which they do, or emailing fitness plans or diet plans? How does that fit into bodybuilding then?
Yeah, so bodybuilding, of course, is a competitive sport for which you need to go on stage. So I haven't really seen any example where people do that online. But providing training, of course, they do. And the one thing that has really has witnessed a huge growth in the past few months has been home training. But of course, a lot of the trainers have been affected by the pandemic because gyms have been closed for a very long time. Even if they were open, clients would stay away because they were worried about the consequences of going to the gym. At the same time, one thing I always emphasize in my writing about this group is that they're self-made men. So they're used to reinventing themselves. They're used to thinking beyond what other people think is ordinary. So they're very creative in finding new avenues, new ways of making money. And I think that kind of comes with already having taken the step of doing something so fundamentally different from anybody else around them, be that their family or their friends or etc. Yeah.
Your book goes from Bombay to Delhi to Chandigarh to Bangalore. It traverses sort of like a lot of places in the country. And while I was reading it, I could see the stark differences in attitudes of trainers or people who you interview and who you met, from one city to the other. So what was it like? Did the perception of looking at oneself in the mirror, from a simple sense of that, change from people in different cities, or did they all think alike? And what was that like? If you could share some anecdotes as well, that would be great.
Yeah, well, so the research, of course, I mean, the point of departure for this research was really the momentum that I witnessed in 2008 when Om Shanti Om came out in the cinemas, and Shah Rukh Khan revealed his freshly baked abs in the song, what is it, Gard Disco or something. I always forget the title. I mean, I can probably hum along it quite easily, but and sort of that set off that momentum. So initially, I kind of sort of understood this to be a Mumbai thing because of the Bollywood industry and the fast pace of life. But one thing that I quickly found is that equally in Delhi, there was a huge growth in gyms, and that had a lot to do with money because capital is really Delhi in that sense, as India's capital, is also the capital of India's capital. It's where the money is. So there is a lot of money to spend on going to the gym and everything that comes with it. But in the end, the research, I settled on doing research in 4 different cities that are basically the cities that I'm the most familiar with in India. One being Chennai, where I had a number of informants that I knew for a long time and who were actually not the quintessential, the archetypical trainers, but instead had said goodbye to promising jobs in ITs and journalism, among others, to start their own gym. So that kind of fascinated me because they came from a very different angle. And then, of course, there was Bangalore, the city that I guess I call home when I'm in India. So these are the 4 cities that I really try to focus on. But research also took place in other cities such as Pune and Patna, among others. So this research was really done over a decade. Not all the time, obviously, but whenever there was an opportunity to meet up with people that I knew and I'd gotten to know well and who were willing to keep me updated about their lives. And in a sense, that's also how the research developed organically. If you ask me about very specific differences between the cities, that's a little harder to say because the fitness phenomena is everywhere now. And I've also, for instance, interviewed trainers in a city like Patna, which you wouldn't immediately associate with this kind of middle-class living. But there is very much a Gold's Gym in the center of Patna. There are, in fact, 2 Gold's Gyms in Patna, as far as I know. And they basically function in a very similar manner as the Gold's Gym does anywhere else in India. So there are a lot of similarities that way. But of course, differences, the outward appearances in Mumbai will always be starker than they are in Delhi. In Delhi, people will always be more keen to spend money on high-end gyms than elsewhere. So that's certainly true.
So there was this sudden insurgence, or the rise of gyms in the country, which wasn't there earlier. Like when I was growing up, and in the early 2000s or even in the late 90s or mid 90s, I didn't see it. I was like, suddenly one fine day, I think in about 2005, 2006, I see, they've just been on the rise since then.
Yeah.
Was there a marked shift, for it to rise besides maybe Bollywood had a lot to do with it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, television serials. I see all the men in TV have to look the same in that sense. They all look the same. I mean, they have the same set of abs or the same chiseled features, and So what led to this shift? That it was so drastic.
Well, I think as I start the book, actually, there are three movies that you need to understand as being crucial to this development. The oldest one I won't mention here because it kind of deters from the story, but Om Shanti Om was already mentioned. And then roughly 1 year later, you had Gajini with Amir Khan, which was actually a remake of a Tamil movie, which in turn was, of course, a remake of a Hollywood classic, Memento. One of the things that really became central to Bollywood movies at that time was the notion of transformation. So a movie no longer just became popular because of the star having that body. No, it was about actually being able to transform yourself in such a way. And I think that really caught on, and fitness centers very quickly started piggybacking on that notion and started suggesting, well, we can transform you, we can change the way you look. And of course, Amir Khan is still the best example there, who constantly does that with every movie. And with every movie, he goes through a bodily transformation that becomes a separate storyline in the newspapers. He's not the only one. Farhan Akhtar has done the same in Bak Milka Bak. And you remember with that movie, probably, there were all sorts of analysis in the newspaper which dissected how he had been able to transform his body in the way that he did. Another enormous influence was Men's Health India, the Indian edition of Men's Health, because that helped layer the body differently. You need to think of this body as not necessarily a very practical one. You don't need this body to do your work. It's not a body that will help you do an accounting job or an IT job. So why have that body in the first place? There's no real need for it beyond, of course, the desire of wanting to be fit. There are lots of ways of being fit, and it's not necessarily that this is the fittest or the healthiest body at least. So to understand that body, you also need to understand what it precisely is imagined to stand for. And this very much takes it beyond the notion of being simply an attractive body. What health magazines such as Men's Health very cleverly do is connect that body to notions of professionalism, of cosmopolitanism, of worldliness. It's a body that belongs to a high-end professional. So it's a successful body. And of course, there is a certain paradox to it, because again, all the work that professional might do doesn't require this body. But for some reason, these magazines have solved the riddle of how to think differently about that body. Because in the past, this was always a body that was mainly one of the working classes, and that you would actually not equate with the notion of having brains. This has changed, obviously. If you have this body, you clearly know what you're doing. You know how to handle yourself. You know how to transform yourself. You know how to get the job done. So suddenly this body becomes one that can be admired for the knowledge that was put in it. Well, that is a huge change from the past, where these were generally the kind of sort of the Gunda figures, the doorman, underworld types that you think like, really? Oh, they would hang out in your neighborhood gym, but you would stay far away from that as a middle-class boy. I mean, come on. Do you think your parents would have allowed you to go to one of these gyms? Probably not. They would have thought, what is Vivek up to? What is he doing? What is he going to do next? Money laundering?
You know, and when I was reading this book, of course, there was this question of how how we look at the body in such a glorified way, that when I go to an app like Grindr, or when I'm on Tinder, or when I'm on a hookup or a dating app, the first thing they ask me is to send a full body picture. You know,
of course you do that immediately.
Yeah, or if not, a picture in my boxer shorts, because they want to see how I look with on, but full profile of the body, like full vertical, and sometimes without clothes on, which of course I find it very rude. But you know, it just puts so much pressure on a simple thing like dating, which is not so simple after all. So where does that fit into this? You know, into muscular India or fit India? You know, then does dating have a chance? I mean, do people like me who look a certain way have a chance at all?
Well, you know, I mean, whether you have a chance or I have a chance on one of these dating apps, I have no idea. I'm very unfamiliar with them otherwise. But this is typically where you start to understand what might motivate clients to go to the gym. And it's in that sense very similar to what motivated women to lose weight in the past. So it's all about body images that are, if you don't have a certain body, then you're not considered attractive, not considered worthy to be loved or cherished, or even for a one-night stand. So obviously this body is also sexually attractive. Interestingly, this is not a conversation not a topic that I often encountered among trainers, because trainers, their day-to-day existence is often very full in terms of training, providing training, making money, taking care of family. So in that sense, if you wanted to talk about whether, so they weren't on these apps. They lead fairly traditional existences that way. They wouldn't have time for it either. But of course, clients would talk about that. They wanted to look a certain way, and that's how they would find their way to the gym. Not just gay men, also straight men.
Yeah, of course. In fact, I've seen trainers on Tinder, but who only advertise their services as a fitness trainer. That they're looking for work on Tinder and Grindr also. They're straight men who are just looking for work, which I find very fascinating. That dating apps have now come to this as well.
Yeah. Well, some of them might provide same-sex services, obviously, if they find a way to wrap their minds around that, or they get in a situation where that might present good money. Then this is, of course, something we see all over the world. I mean, this is also something you can capitalize on. There is also, it's not just bodily capital, it's also sexual capital. I mean, that's what literally what the body presents, and it's what other people desire, and they might be willing to pay very good money for it. And if you look at the backgrounds of the trainers I met, some of them come from very humble backgrounds, very working class backgrounds, where their fathers were either weavers, or they would run a food stall, or in some other form. So they're very much the memory of economic precarity is, of course, very real in their lives. They know that where they are now is something they have accomplished, but they could also stand to lose. And besides that, we should not forget that the whole thing of building a muscular body is not just time and energy intensive, but also very, very expensive. Especially the sport of bodybuilding is incredibly expensive to transform your body. I mean, people have often asked me, like, oh God, they must all be on anabolic steroids and growth hormones, but these are incredibly expensive things to use. So if you do want to do that, you need to come either from a certain background or find a way to get the money. And these might all be incentives,
And also then the power structure changes, right? I mean, if you're offering your body, say for a one-night stand, or for a sexual encounter, or for a long-term sexual encounter in need for money, then the power dynamics change between those two people. In that sense, you're already from a certain background or a certain strata of society, and you still don't get the agency in that sense, because you're taking money from someone. So that person automatically is on on one notch up the ladder in that sense. So, which I thought was again very interesting.
Yeah, and it also brings with it the question, of course, of age and how long you'll be able to keep that up. I must say, though, in the book, I only really zoom in on one case story of somebody who's making his money in this way, who now features in his own pornographic productions and who offers same-sex services. Most men do not, most trainers do not. They go by and they make the money as fitness trainers, but they might end up in situations where this could potentially be another way of earning money. But I guess one of the things that I try to unpack a little bit in the book is also this immense fascination that my own upper middle class friends, most of them, gay friends in India would have for this topic, thinking that the men I met were all one way or the other available for such adventures as they would. And I've often compared it as the image they had was of me doing field work in a candy store where the owner away and the door wide open, and thus the candy up for grabs. I think somewhere in the book I describe it as what is it, gulab jamuns or whatever, sort of, you can just, it was so easy. And besides the fact that I myself was not interested in that, in pursuing that, it kind of struck me always as quite fascinating that when I interviewed these men and who I knew very well, and I knew their families incredibly well, they themselves did not share such stories. So what I sought to understand there is where might these fantasies come from? And a lot of that has to do with how also people from an upper middle class position in India imagine the lower middle classes to function and be available. And thus, in the end, also see trainers like they see others that they employ, be it gardeners or cooks or drivers. So there is a definite class dimension to that fantasy itself.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, is also slightly demeaning. So it's also a way of seeking control, seeking hegemony in a way, or hierarchy. The idea that, these men, in the end, they just sell their bodies, and that makes them somehow worthless. Not worthless, but worthless.
Yeah.
And that is a way of probably also with dealing with the idea that this body is so idealized in popular culture that it's very easy to feel somehow insufficient unequal in the face of a person that otherwise, in terms of socioeconomics, you would consider below you. But because that body is so starkly idealized in media, you kind of start thinking that for some reason you need to respect it more than you actually want. And then this story, this fantasy of this man being available and doing all sorts of things that the Lord shouldn't see, in a sense, becomes one of, what becomes demeaning, one of kind of almost rectifying a kind of a difference that people don't want to face up to.
So we are getting questions from people. I'm just going to jump into them.
All right.
Shubhankar is asking, I think you've already answered this throughout the conversation, but he's saying, I was wondering how these men obsessed with beautiful bodies coped with aging when their bodies were not in their prime.
Yeah.
So that's the one part of this question. The second part, I think we've answered it. And how did it change the clientele and demand for those who engaged in sex work, which is not the case, which puts a high premium on youth and beauty as essentially linked to desirability. Yeah. So he's talking about, first, why don't you talk about aging? Because even I had that question for you.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, we don't know yet. In many ways, I don't know how this is going to work out. The only senior men that I encountered were bodybuilders who were in their prime when none of this was popular. So it was very much a niche sport that only existed in certain pockets in Delhi and Mumbai, maybe Chennai, but not beyond that. So if you think of 2008, 2009 as a starting point, even those men who decided to become fitness trainers then have been involved in this for roughly a decade and are just still in their 30s. So, none of these trainers are, in their late 40s when aging really becomes an issue. But Kishore, who's the guy who features in the first chapter and also in the fifth chapter, talks about that a little because he's feeling that. He realizes that certain things that he's used to doing, such as handstands and sort of acrobatic things, that he's always utilized that to showcase how physically fit he is, no longer come that easy to him. And so aging is of a concern, but I think aging is also part of the bigger concern of how to maintain that body in the long run and how to improve on it. So it always comes with other concerns.
Sure. Rohit asks, in what major ways did your research on Muscular India make you reassess your past perspectives about India and its notions of masculinity?
Yeah, well, the notion of masculinity, we've not really come to that, but I've had this question before, because there's a lot of misconceptions about how the muscular body connects with a particular idea of masculinity. So what you see is that people often equate that massively muscular body with the idea of a toxic masculinity, as a man who is all powerful, who might even be one of the guys who really harasses women outside, who is very patriarchally inclined, etc. Interestingly, I found the opposite. So since these men have really had to deviate, do something different, they've had to question all sorts of things about where they come from. And therefore, I found that a lot of these men are actually quite the opposite of this archetypical masculine guy. So that is one part of the story. They are definitely not the type of man who will harass women outside, also simply because within the gym they have female clients, they have female colleagues, there are mirrors everywhere, so they're not the types for that. In fact, they're very much in tune with concerns over women's safety outside. At the same time, what you see is that the muscular body also doesn't necessarily equate a very self-secure masculine self. And this has to do with the mirror again. A lot of them have doubts about their bodies, and not just doubts in terms of whether the body is perfect, but whether or not they will be able to upkeep it, maintain and improve it, because it's expensive. So there is always the concern of money. And a lot of them are depending on their family members to support them. So in that sense, they're also not your archetypical family men who are providing an income and taking care of their elderly parents. A lot of them actually depend on their parents far longer than they would have done had they simply found a job and gone to the workplace and brought home an income.
We have time for one last question, which I'm going to ask you. What did
Oh,
you
wow.
notice about the relationship between class and caste as you got involved in their personal and professional journeys while reporting and researching?
So there's caste in the book, one chapter in particular where I look at the NCR and at the Jat and Gujar communities and their involvement in Pelwani wrestling, as well as bodybuilding and providing fitness training, and how this is reflected on from an upper middle class perspective in South Delhi. So there you see that caste kind of is folded into a notion of lower middle class, new middle class money. Caste itself, I always find it very, people always sort of expect me to be very concrete about how caste works in the world of bodybuilding. But obviously, it's very difficult to provide a clear-cut answer about it, because to me, caste is also, my focus mainly on class and on middle classness, and caste is an element in that story of middle class becoming, but not necessarily something that is very present on the gym floor as something that people know of each other. So what you see is, of course, that caste facilitates middle classness, because some people, especially those of upper middle class background, tend to be of upper caste backgrounds. But it's not necessarily something that is very strongly present in the gym or in the world of bodybuilding. And probably this is also has something to do with the way these men have had to rethink all sorts of aspects about themselves, be it patriarchy or caste. So their friends also are often of very mixed religious backgrounds, where you see Hindu trainers celebrate Muslim festivities online and sort of paying homage to that to support their colleagues in bodybuilding and fitness.
Great. So I'm going to hand it over back to Sanjoy. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Vivek.
This conversation. It was fascinating and extremely insightful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michiel Baas. Thank you so much, Vivek Tejuja. That was a fascinating conversation about the innards of bodybuilding in this new, as you said, masculine India. Wonder where that's going to go. And of course, if you're watching, the protein shakes are truly problematic. So anybody who uses them on a regular basis, do please be warned. Look and read at the fine print below. We have one of our own colleagues in Teamwork who, through prolonged use of protein, that led to a sort of blood clot in his brain, even
Wow.
years after he had stopped using the protein shakes.
Yeah.
We've seen this up close. So Absolutely. Thank you both for joining us. And Michael, many congratulations with the book. It's really got some brilliant reviews across the
Thanks.
world, and it's been doing really well here. And I think everybody's loved the cover of the
Yes.
bodybuilder with.
By Cop Shiva, photographer in Bangalore. Yeah, there it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to all our viewers, sorry we couldn't take all the questions. We did run out of time. Please do remember to log back on next week, Wednesday and Friday, to watch another set of great sessions at JLF's Brave New World. We start with the fire starters, Jan Carson in conversation with Jayanti Seth, and this is at 7 p.m. next Wednesday. And that's followed by Serious Men, Sudhir Mishra in conversation with Mani Tripathi Tikku. And this will be at the 8:30 p.m. Slot on the 28th of October. And just a quick reminder for those of you who haven't seen I Believe Art Matters, this is 450 artists, everybody from A.R. Rahman and Kailash Kher to Indian Ocean, Aditi Mangal Das, a slew of fabulous theater performers have all come together in a 6.5 hour special called I Believe Art Matters to basically focus attention on the arts, on artisans, on artists who have been devastated by the present pandemic. The effort is to raise resources to support about 5,200 families. And you can view this, it's going to be streamed live, or it's already being streamed as we speak on the television channel India Ahead. And it will be on today, tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday. So again, you can just search for I Believe Art Matters on India Ahead TV. And of course, it's also on our Facebook page and YouTube channels. So please do watch and please do contribute. It will really help. Thank you all. Stay safe and see you Wednesday, and have a wonderful festival season, and happy Durga Puja.
Thank you.